I think the interesting part of that question, the origin story, is where someone chooses to start too in the story. And I'm going to go way back, even though it's not necessarily my story, but to my family's story. Our origin in Kansas City, on one side of it, family came up through Alabama, a group of folks, and this is in the Great Migration, right? Some go to Kansas City. Another set of us went to Southern California. But the Kansas City crew ended up having kind of an interesting time. It's a world of challenges. So that's them. Other side of my mother's family came up from Oklahoma, and so they were kind of black folks who had lived in Indian country and all those things. That is the family tradition as I knew it, and that's just from my mother's side. I've never met my father in my life, and so it has been my mom, her family, my sisters, and all of that along the way. So born in KC, I still remember my mother telling me that when I was born, she actually couldn't think of a name for me. Quinton is my grandfather's name, and my uncle's name, and my mother's name is Quintonella. So I think it was just a name that was easy to get. We lived in Kansas City, lived in the inner city of Kansas City in the 1980s, which, to younger people, I don't think they quite know the stories of America's inner cities of the 80s, but there were many challenges. A lot of people were still looking to flood outside of them, and that's the Kansas City that I grew up knowing. It was, intriguing. I have some faint memories of it, but pretty early on in my life, my mother said we got to get the hell out of the city, and we moved to a place where there would be no distractions, and she found it in central Kansas. My uncle was stationed at an Air Force base outside Wichita. I moved to a place called Hutchinson, Kansas, and that's where I started kind of my educational journey. I, liked it there. A member of Cub Scouts. I did all the types of things that a kid in that part of the world would. What I think I've realized as I've become an adult was, though, that my mother, a single black woman at that point, probably in her early 30s, in a town of 20,000 people in Tornado Alley, wanted to get back to KC. So came back here. We moved back to the inner city. I ended up at a very nice private school that continued me on a great educational trajectory, but all the while allowed me to live these kind of, twin lives, right? And our city was very segregated then, it's very segregated now, which was my residential life and family life is almost exclusively black, and then this almost exclusively white world of education. Go through school, college for me is in St. Louis, do a study abroad in South Africa, get to Cornell Law School, and then I think as I looked at my professional life, the desire was, how do I bridge divides? How do I make sure we have a community that's building opportunities for all of our young people so someone's mom doesn't have to make their child some exceptional character, but instead it becomes normal that we expect success from all of our young people. I will say this about my educational journey at all of my steps, having an outstanding educational foundation that trains you and teaches you to be the best in any room, not in an arrogant way, not from mere ego or people you know, but frankly, from some scrappiness, from understanding that yes, you can get into any room probably in the country, but you also will have to prove yourself when you're there. I think that's something that particularly in my law school portion of my journey, but throughout has acquitted me well in my life. I think that when I think about the journey of how you get from, let's say, homelessness in Kansas City and knowing Middle America to orientation at Cornell Law School and Myron Taylor Hall, a few things I think are steps along the way. One of which was, I always knew the reputation of Cornell, always knew the school. There are not many Cornellians in my part of the country, and so I won't say that there was somebody who said, young man, go there. But I think when I was looking at a set of law schools, as I understood it, I wanted to, like any person in their 20s, have a wealth of options. And to me, that wealth of options was, I didn't want it to just be channeled exclusively into, let's say, a certain type of practice in one community. I didn't want to have to actually make my educational experience learning to be one with the stream of others that are coming out of a giant law school and name your city X or Y and are doing kind of a similar thing. I loved the fact that when I looked at the Cornell that I knew I could be a lawyer at the finest law firms in America. I knew that I could clerk on the Supreme Court. I knew that there were political actors doing any number of things around the country. I knew I could just really get deeply into nature, and I could do it in a space where the focus could be on my educational journey. And I continue to give credit to that to this day. And because it's now probably about almost 20 years ago to the day, which makes me feel a little older than I would like to be, but still remember when I was admitted. I was on spring break in Miami. And, things aren't as fancy as they were now, and so I forget if, it wasn't by mail, I'm not quite that age, but, saw an email, saw that I had been admitted to Cornell, and I was excited, very exhilarated, and I was excited to learn more about the school itself. And I think one thing that is actually interesting and unique about Cornell that you may not always hear It is the type of school that makes you more inquisitive about the school itself, about your peers, about the institution around you, and frankly about law and the ways that you can help change it and I think mold it to be best for America. Yep, so after transition, one intriguing vignette, which may be relevant to our discussion or may not, in South Africa, I still remember I was in a classroom, professors talking, group of students, predominantly white students, but nonetheless, the professor says this line, and he says, "You all remember when you went to the legally segregated schools, right?" They're all like, "Oh yeah, of course." And two things come to me from that. First, as I'm sitting with all my peers who are the exact same age that I am, born in the mid-1980s, I'm kind of like, wow, right? You see how quickly a society changes. But it also got me to think about the things that weren't fixed in the United States. My mother's generation went through the exact same thing, and in many ways, the way we still live in a lot of communities like this one and others still have large-scale segregation. And so that also got me to think, let's change it so that we can actually see rooms change, see our communities change and improve. Right. Ain't that the truth? And on the legal point, and something that I have always enjoyed about being a lawyer that you see in the South African context, there are many challenges to the country today. There are many issues. The one thing that around the world people still greatly respect from the transition in South Africa, in addition to the late Nelson Mandela, but it's the Constitution. That Constitution continues to be a model for countries that are coming out of fascism, racist control, whatever you call it. And defense of the Constitution, whether it be what we saw in South Africa, whether it be in discussions in the United States today, or anywhere in the world, is something that I think is important to why lawyers do what they do. And it's something that we learn a lot about in law school, and so I've always enjoyed being a lawyer. In law school, I was a participant in the Cornell Death Penalty Clinic. And the Death Penalty Clinic was an enterprise then, and it still is today, that worked with condemned inmates throughout the United States. At my time, it was primarily just the United States. I know they also do work worldwide. And I was assigned to work on a case for a man who was convicted of a double homicide in Georgia. The town was Griffin, Georgia. Spalding County, you're about 45 minutes to an hour south of Atlanta, although in Atlanta traffic, you're 3 hours south of Atlanta. And I was there to work on his clemency. So appeals were exhausted. We had a final appeal, I think, at the beginning of my time that had gone to the 11th Circuit, and but we knew that this was going to be a clemency case. A few things that are interesting about that case. So at its core, by the way, background, Curtis Osborne is the defendant. The defendant, I believe, was in his late teens at the time of the incident. He is convicted of murdering his drug dealer and murdering the drug dealer's girlfriend. Written in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the description in all the cases, all the stories was, he killed ex-gentleman for money. He killed her because she was there. The defendant, Mr. Osborne, is represented by a county public defender, a contract public defender, who carried 1,100 felony cases in the year that he represented Mr. Osborne. Any lawyer will understand a docket of 1,100 cases is unconscionable. And he took on extra cases to make extra money. He'd get paid a better fee for a death penalty case. Mr. Osborne's case lasted 4 days. He was convicted. He had a 1-day sentencing phase where he was sentenced to death by electric chair. A lot of our work years later was to prove a few things. First of all, obviously there was an assistance of counsel claim. However, the courts, of course, didn't find ineffectiveness and didn't find real issues. However, his lawyer, who was white, Mr. Osborne was black, the victims were black. His lawyer was a member of a number of different racial organizations, racist organizations. He commonly trafficked in the N-word, describing his clients to one of his white clients who was also in a capital case at the time. He said, "Look, I'm working hard for you. That little nigger deserves the chair." And so, we brought that to the attention of authorities in Georgia. They were not persuaded. And probably in one of the more interesting engagements I have ever been in my life, the Cornell Death Penalty Clinic allowed me to come down to Atlanta for the clemency hearing. The governor of Georgia does not make the clemency decision, unlike other states. He appoints a board of 5 people. 5 people that, by and large, and I bet it still is today, 1 preacher, 2 cops, 1 prosecutor, and 1 nice lady. And, the first question when we were there for the presentation was, "Counselor, why does it matter if he killed 2 people? Why does the racism of the lawyer, how he grew up, all of that, why does it matter?" So at that point, you're cooked. The other thing that I think is particularly heinous about how Georgia does it is the same day you have the hearing is the day you are scheduled for execution. I mean, just ungodly. But fortunately for us, we gave such, I guess, a good hearing. The board decided they couldn't make a decision that day. And I had flown back to an internship I was doing in Boston at the time, at a very good law firm. And so I was back in Boston the next day, telling everybody, oh yeah, it was an interesting experience. I got a call from the federal public defender in Atlanta who called and told me the board's decided he'll be executed in 7 hours. Curtis says, thank you for all you did to care about him. And, kind of sat in my office. I still remember showing some age compared for a student today who sees these things. Refreshed the website of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution every 10 minutes until at whatever hour, murderer put to death for 1991 homicide. And so that was the experience. And when you think about how did it change the trajectory of my life, I was sitting at probably one of the finest law firms, not just in New England, but in our country, that would probably set me and my family off for a wonderful life for years thereafter. And they were great people, and I respect them greatly. But I think that moment told me I had to do more. How do we avoid a Curtis Osborne being in that position in the first place? How do we make sure, not saying outcomes, but how do we make sure that there is a broader viewpoint of justice? How do we make sure that we don't see these types of circumstances particularly disproportionately befall black men born in circumstances like my own? And so I think that was life-changing in many ways. As professions go, the reason to choose a career in law is because you get to be at the center of what the future of our country and your community is. Whether you are one who is looking to do public service and change the world in ways that help society aligned with your viewpoints, whether you're someone who is an incredible creative who understands that business growth and formation is something that is vital and for which we need people who can get rid of the hurdles, can move things out of the way, and can help entrepreneurs find success, or whether you're somebody who just cares a ton about the Constitution and believes that what makes America truly special, what has allowed our country to succeed, is actually our adherence to the Constitution, predictability in terms of property rights, contractual rights and obligations, and frankly, adherence to a Constitution that stands up and upholds individual rights. And even when they're under threat, knowing that we have courts that can serve as a bulwark against the types of things that would take rights, freedoms, our moral obligations away. I don't know if there is any professional program that exists that allows you to have that great of an impact on society and frankly the families around you. And that's why I've always been honored to be a lawyer. Cornell Law is a special place because it truly allows you in an environment where you can excel to do absolutely anything. You cannot get lost. You have professors, including doctrinal professors, stars, people who are arguing before the Supreme Court, people who've had exceptional careers in government, business, and beyond. You have them focused on you. You have them finding the kid who was a B-plus student in your constitutional law class and saying, I think you're special enough that, yeah, I'm gonna trust you with this incredible case that can change your professional trajectory. It's the type of school where you have friend networks and connections that are going on to do great things. In my area alone, the United States Congresswoman for the community right next to my own was a classmate of mine at Cornell Law School, and we're just bouncing around here in Middle America. And so it's a degree that travels well with you anywhere in our country, and I'd argue internationally. It's an institution that lifts and supports you, and it is an environment that is friendly, warm, and accepting. And frankly, even as somebody who knew not a darn thing about New York State, particularly central New York, before I was there, it's actually a very unique and fascinating place to go to learn for a few years. Cornell Law gave me every opportunity I ever wanted. I sit in this position now, recognizing that my potential is somewhat limitless even now. And while there are maybe some doors closed by my own choices, I have a legal foundation, a law school training, and a law school network that can help me excel anywhere. And there are not many schools that can do that, and there are not many schools that can do that at the size that they are and the type of special relationships and friendships that you can have, and frankly, in the times that we're in now.